Today we're going to talk about 5 burning questions about position coaches, their functions, what they do, and how they do them, and all that's coming up after the bumper.
What do you mean you don't subscribe to my son's YouTube channel?
Mama, no!
Just snap the damn ball, RJ.
What's up, kid folk? It's RJ Young. I am not on a step mill. Consider hitting the like and subscribe button because I upload a video every single day. It's always OU related, college football related, sports related. We have a good time. Unless this just isn't your cup of tea anymore, for which I understand, but this is what we're doing. And today we're going to talk about these 5 burning questions, a fact, if you will, frequently asked questions about position coaches submitted to me by one of my favorite folks, Terry Beckham. So check this out. Her first question is, have college coaches traditionally been hired by position and I'm just now hearing about it? Yeah, for the most part, that's true, because you would not want to necessarily hire a person with a defensive background to be your offensive coordinator. That said, there is some moving and shaking in there, and depending on the kind of staff that you're building, you might look for one person who has a specific skill in one area or another. So, for instance, Josh Heupel coached tight ends at Arizona, but we all know that guy was a quarterback in college and would eventually become a quarterback's coach, offensive coordinator, and a pretty doggone good head coach if his first season at UCF is any indication. That said, there is some give and take there because you would like to be able to build a staff that can cover up the weaknesses with what the strengths are. So, like, for instance, if you had a dude that wasn't necessarily good at coaching tight ends because he'd never coached them before, but he's got extensive experience with running backs and wide receivers, and you had another guy who might have played some tight end in college but did not coach tight ends in college, you might swap those guys out. You want to be able to put position coaches where they can basically help each other. So in talking about this, let's think about Alex Grinch coaching the safeties and Roy Manning coaching cornerbacks. Well, we know that Roy Manning does not have a ton of experience coaching in the secondary, though he has some back in Michigan. We know that his bread and butter is linebacker because he played linebacker in college, he played linebacker in the NFL, and he's coached linebackers at Washington State, Michigan, and yes, UCLA before getting to Oklahoma. But I think if you pair him with Alex Grinch, you can see how that works, and it's not going to be the kind of weakness that it might normally be if, say, Alex Grinch was coaching defensive tackles. Her second question, does a position coach focus on fundamentals or is it more schematic? Ideally, you want this person focusing on the fundamentals of the game within the scheme. So they kind of work on each other and work off of each other because you're coaching a different technique if you say you're a defensive line coach and you play a 2-gap system, which is for which your defensive linemen are responsible for 2 gaps as opposed to 1 gap. So you're going to teach a different technique as to how to get off the ball, how to catch blocks, and or how to keep linebackers clean to make plays in a 2-gap system. Whereas in a 1-gap system, you're more coaching these kids about how to beat the person in front of them, get into the backfield, and how to tackle and or stop the run, what pass rushes are looking like, not over pursuing, keeping contained. These are all things that you coach just a little bit differently within the scheme. But ideally, yes, you're working on fundamentals, you're working on footwork, you're working on things that are ideal and specific to your position. Her next question, logistically, how does that work in practice? Do players break off into positions more often in the spring and less throughout the season? Again, ideally, and in most instances, yes, right? Because you have meetings for which you're going over the things that y'all do well or what you're responsible for inside of the system. You're not necessarily learning what the defense is doing from a defensive line standpoint if you are working in the secondary. Cornerbacks need to know what everybody's responsible for, but they really need to know what their job is. And in the words of Bill Belichick, who's in his nice Super Bowl now, do your job, right? That is what position coaches are supposed to do, is teach kids how to do their job within the larger picture of what we're talking about is a defense. Again, logistically, the way that it works is you spend a lot more time working on your winter training, working on your drills, working on your footwork, working on how you are going to play the role that we plan for you to play in the fall. And then in the fall, specifically in preseason camp, you're working within the defense proper, and we get to see how these things we try to teach you in the winter and the spring and the summer have manifested to see who the best 11 are for the kind of scheme that we want to play. So I would think that this is the way that I would do this, and the way that I've done it in the past, as, coaching freshmen as much as you can do that. And the way that I've seen it done more specifically is, you go from individual training, right? Individual specific training to your position to gradually building out, and you're scaling this, right? It's periodic. It's periodizing what you're doing into spring, periodizing what you're doing in the summer, periodizing what you do in the preseason, and then periodizing what you do over the course of the season for what your goals are. Her fourth question, is it unusual to have a guy who was a running back in college coach linebackers? No, it's not unusual, because what you're doing is teaching the technique. As a matter of fact, when I was working on a story about Jeff Mead and Carson Meyer at Union, I got to meet Coach Fredericks, who is the head coach at Union. And he would tell me, look, I don't necessarily need a quarterback to coach quarterbacks. I don't need an offensive lineman to coach offensive line. I can teach him how to fundamentally coach those positions. What I need is good men that I can trust. That's how he puts together his staff. He says, I know enough about football to be able to teach that person football. I cannot teach that person how to be loyal. I can't teach that person how to arrive on time. I can't teach that person how to have great character. And I can't teach that person how to motivate my kids. I can teach them football, though. So he looks for those traits that he can't teach, knowing what he can. So long story short, yes, Roy Manning, who had coached running backs and linebackers, is really a great motivator. And we know that the kids respond to him in the past. And I think that most folks would say, if this guy's a football coach and he's been around the game of football and he loves the game of football, I'll be able to teach him all the things that I need to know, because at the end of the day, it is football. It's not rocket science, right? It's not difficult to learn if you want to learn it. And I would say that about almost anything. And the last question, are NFL coaching staffs operated much the same? Yes, they are. I think a good example of this is the new Cleveland Browns head coach, Freddie Kitchens. Freddie Kitchens is a quarterback, right? He came out of Alabama, played for Gene Stallings as a QB. He coached running backs at Arizona, famously coached Adrian Peterson. He's coached all over the board, and that's another guy for which you might have thought that his time would have come back in Arizona when he got passed over to Byron Leftwich to be the offensive coordinator over there, but he bided his time, right? You want to go where you're going to get a job, right? Because what is a quality control assistant supposed to do anyway? Well, Tyler Tettleton will be able to tell you, but that guy's a quarterback. He's not a quality control assistant. What we're doing, again, is the Kirk Fredericks way of putting together a staff. I think it's everywhere. You want guys you can trust. It's great if they know football. It's actually imperative that they love football, but you can teach them the things that they don't know. And I guess this is scaling to different levels because, yes, there is, I think, a floor when we're talking about how much an NFL coach can know or not know, and the same thing with a floor about what you can get away with in Pee Wee, right? But at the end of the day, you need a staff that you trust, that knows how you want to operate, and that trusts you, right? And that's what you're doing at every level. The reason that we put more emphasis on the NFL is because it's the highest form of professional football, and they get paid a lot of money to coach a game that you and I played when we were children. All right, that's it for me. Deuces.